Financial Services will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. This hearing is titled The Annual Testimony of the Secretary of the Treasury on the State of the International Financial System. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. I want to welcome Treasury Secretary Bessent to his first appearance before our committee. The President is fortunate to have a cabinet official of this fine caliber. This annual hearing is meant to examine the international financial system. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the regional development banks play a key role in advancing U.S. interests. But in recent years, they've surrendered to mission creep. Under the Biden administration, the IMF's management tried to turn the fund into World Bank Light, launching initiatives on climate change and social policy. If the Trump administration wants to pull back the IMF's mission creep, it can start by scrapping the Resilience and Sustainability Facility and instead focus on the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust. Other reforms are just as vital. In 2021, the IMF management pushed through an allocation of special drawing rights, SDRs, that gave China over $40 billion in unconditional liquidity, with another $17 billion going to Russia and around $5 billion each going to Iran and Venezuela. Congress had no say in the matter. Any future SDR allocations must have elected lawmakers' buy-in. Moving forward, we need leadership at the IMF that cares more about the fund's core mission rather than hurting the feelings of the Chinese Communist Party. Think about it. No one can say what the true growth rate is of the world's second largest economy. No one really understands how China manages its exchange rate. It nearly has a $1 trillion trade surplus and a central bank controlled by authoritarian dictatorial political party. Its opaque predatory lending to developing countries has seen no significant restructuring. All this is an indictment of the IMF's leadership, and we need greater transparency. Turning from the IMF, the World Bank, and the Asian Development Bank still greenlight $1 billion per year for Chinese projects. I urge the Trump administration to end all World Bank and Asian Development Bank assistance to China by the end of President Trump's term. At the same time, I commend the World Bank for its recent openness to financing nuclear energy, which is a priority of mine and enjoys bipartisan support here in Congress. During the spring meetings last month, I met with officials from around the world who agreed that nuclear power is an obvious fit for the Development Bank's core mission. I was pleased to see you, Mr. Secretary, echo your support for nuclear energy in your remarks at the bank meetings as well. If we care about back-to-basics approach, the banks can go even further by recommitting themselves to public health, education, and infrastructure. For example, 70% of 10-year-olds in low and middle-income countries can't understand a simple written text. Over 400,000 children die of malaria each year. Half of sub-Saharan Africa has no reliable electricity. But for too long, the World Bank and others have spent more time and more money on climate change and empty rhetoric than trying to tackle these urgent development challenges. Mr. Secretary, our committee appreciated your remarks at the IMF and World Bank spring meetings, where you outlined an active approach to these issues and noted the critical leadership role that the United States plays in our multilateral financial institutions. We should all be pleased that Treasury has a leader who has signaled that he will tackle these issues in a serious way. I look forward to discussing our international financial institutions with you, as well as hearing from our members on the various priorities that are important to them. I yield back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the committee, Ms. Waters, for 4 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since the first day of the Trump administration, members of Congress and the American public have demanded transparency and accountability regarding the economic calamity this regime has caused. Instead, we've been met with flat outlined lies, deception, and unfathomable level of gaslighting by officials like today's witness, Secretary Bessent. You are about to go down in history as the man who oversaw one of the most significant economic downfalls in modern history. The U.S. economy, which had the strongest recovery from the pandemic compared to other large economies in the world, is now falling behind. In the first quarter since Trump took office, the United States economy shrank, with our gross domestic product decreasing by 0.3%. We are falling behind while Canada, Europe, and China are racing ahead. What happened to the golden age you and President Trump promised the American people? Mr. Bessent, you are also the face of what the Wall Street Journal has described as, and I quote, the dumbest trade war in history. As a result of this stupidity, U.S. stock markets have experienced the worst first 100 days of any presidential term in more than 50 years. America's CEOs are sounding the alarm of what's to come. Empty shelves and higher prices that the American consumer will pay. Companies are already running out of inventory. Port volume is down, and small businesses are warning that they will not survive this. Moreover, inflation remains a problem, and housing affordability continues to be a challenge, with home builders estimating Trump's tariffs will add $11,000 to each new home they build. I have no doubt that what I'm telling you stuff you already know. It has already been reported that you yourself admitted at an April 22nd closed-door investor summit that Trump's tariffs on China are, quote, unsustainable, quote, unquote. But in public, you've twisted yourself into a pretzel trying to justify them. You're gaslighting the American people into believing that this chaos is all a part of some master plan. Well, if the plan is to steer the U.S. economy into a recession, as economists are predicting, then it's working. Economists say Trump tariffs will cost, on the average, each American family nearly $5,000 more per year. Mr. Bessent, because you and your ultra-wealthy group of insiders can afford this, most Americans cannot. The American people also deserve to know why you handed Elon Musk and his Doge minions access to Treasury's payment systems and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's database. Today, you need to tell the American people why you're dismantling agencies that protect consumers from financial fraud and abuse and weakening ones meant to support the small businesses struggling under the weight of your policies. You need to answer for this, and you need to answer for why senior members of this administration are trying to make a buck off of this market manipulation and blatant, brazen corruption. Chairman Hill, if I were you, I'd swear this witness in before he begins his testimony.
The gentlewoman yields back. The chair recognizes the chair of the Subcommittee on National Security, Illicit Finance, and International Financial Institutions, Mr. Warren Davidson, for 1 minute for an opening statement. Mr. Davidson.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you. As this committee gathers to discuss the state of the international financial system, your remarks at the conclusion of the IMF World Bank spring meetings hit the bullseye. Your vision to steer the IMF and World Bank back to their core missions, macroeconomic stability and economic development, while cutting through mission creep, is exactly what we need. By championing fiscal discipline, anti-corruption measures, and private sector-led growth, you're paving the way for a sustainable global economy. America is done bankrolling China's games and their trade scams. Your call for fairness and U.S. leadership nails it. Tying our dollars to hard reforms at these international institutions, that's accountability that we can and should trust. America First must mean that America's resources advance America's interests. So thank you for your clarity and your tireless efforts, Mr. Secretary. Let's make sure that the global financial system serves Main Street Americans, not globalist elites. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the ranking member of the Subcommittee on National Security, Illicit Finance, and International Financial Institution, Ms. Beatty, for 1 minute for an opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and Mr. Secretary. First, let me start by associating myself with the words of Ranking Member Water. Mr. Secretary, hardworking American families have been struggling, as I'm sure you should know, since the pandemic to put food on their tables and to keep their small businesses open. And just when the Biden administration has started to provide some relief, the Trump administration came in and needlessly tanked the economy. Despite promises to lower costs for American families, we are seeing the direct opposite. I lay the blame on the Trump administration. Inflation is up, borrowing and housing costs are rising, the stock market is in chaos, endangering Americans' retirement savings, and the United States economy shrank in the first quarter since Trump took office. And just to add insult to injury, Republicans are cutting Medicaid and food stamps to pay for huge tax cuts to billionaires. Our constituents deserve better. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Today, we welcome the testimony of the Honorable Scott Bessent, Secretary of the Treasury. We thank you for taking time to be with us. You'll be recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony. Without objection, your written statement will be made part of the record. Mr. Secretary, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Hill, Ranking Member Waters, and members of the committee, I'm grateful to join you today. At the IMF and World Bank spring meetings last month, I relayed an important message. America first does not mean America alone. To the contrary, America first seeks to expand U.S. leadership in international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. By embracing a stronger leadership role, the United States will restore fairness to the international economic system. I look forward to answering your questions on this topic today, and I look forward to providing you with a broad overview of Treasury's achievements and future plans. Specifically, I would like to highlight the Department's efforts to boost U.S. economic growth, improve government efficiency, and target illicit actors that threaten our national security. The core components of the Trump economic agenda are trade, tax cuts, and deregulations. These are not standalone policies. They are interlocking parts of an engine designed to drive economic growth and domestic manufacturing. Tax cuts and cost savings from deregulation raise real incomes for families and businesses. Tariffs create an incentive for reshoring jobs and fair trade. And deregulation complements tariffs by making it easier to invest in energy and manufacturing projects. Already, this agenda is bearing fruit. In the first 100 days of the new administration, 464,000 new jobs were added to the economy. In April alone, over 177,000 American jobs were added, more than 40,000 more than economists predicted. All the while, employment remains low while real hourly wages continue to grow. As important as spurring job growth is wrangling inflation. And in this endeavor, the administration continues to make tangible progress. The CPI for energy goods declined in March, as did the price index for core goods. And the CPI for all items declined for the first time since the COVID pandemic. While the cost of goods is decreasing, so are energy prices. Complementary to our efforts to grow American prosperity, we are focused on improving efficiency across all levels of government, but especially the IRS. We just concluded a successful tax filing season, but the IRS still needs significant reforms to deliver efficient and cost-friendly results for the American people. In this endeavor, we have successfully cut $2 billion from the IRS IT budget without any operational disruptions. We achieved these cost savings by eliminating, renegotiating, and de-scoping wasteful IT and professional service contracts and addressing long-standing efficiencies such as auto-renewed licenses unused for years. This intervention alone will save taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars each year. We are also taking steps at the IRS to reduce administrative costs with a particular focus on paper processing, which has been a long-standing bipartisan goal. Last year, the IRS spent approximately $450 million on paper processing with nearly 6,500 full-time staff dedicated to the task. Through policy changes and automation, Treasury aims to reduce this expense to under $20 million by the end of President Trump's second term. In addition to making government more efficient, Treasury is committed to working alongside the White House to make America safe again. To that end, we have launched a maximum pressure campaign against violent cartels and terrorist networks. We have assessed tens of millions of dollars in civil penalties against organizations facilitating money laundering along the southern border. And by leveraging sanctions, we are choking off the financial lifelines of terrorists, criminals, and hackers from Mexico and Guatemala to China and Iran. In the first 100 days of the new administration, we have set the table for a robust economy that allows Main Street to grow. With Congress and the White House working hand in hand, we expect to see even more positive results over the next few months. Key to expanding economic opportunity for all Americans is making the Trump tax cuts permanent. We are eager to work closely with members of this committee to pass this bill into law. Together, we can build a stronger, safer, and more prosperous America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We will now turn to member questions, and the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Secretary, as I noted in my opening statement, I was pleased to see your endorsement of nuclear energy projects during the World Bank spring meetings last month. And on a bipartisan basis, this committee recently passed my International Nuclear Energy Financing Act, which would establish trust funds at the World Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and potentially other multilateral development banks. Senators from both sides of the aisle also support this concept. So would you support the idea of trust funds to benefit nuclear energy financing at the multilateral development banks?
Mr. Chairman, this administration supports an across-the-board effort to increase the nuclear power for civilian use throughout the world, and we think that the World Bank should make that a key effort.
Thank you. I also referenced my work over the past 5 years with the Treasury and others about IMF reforms. You also referenced that in your talk. Recently, the IMF shareholders agreed to a quota increase, and I appreciate the agreement that this agreement does nothing to increase the voting power of China or Russia, but were Congress to approve this agreement, it would allow future administrations to greenlight more general special drawing rights allocations close to $1 trillion. And that would mean $60 billion of new unconditional liquidity for the Chinese Communist Party, $25 billion for Moscow, and $7 billion each for the regimes in Caracas and Iran, with no sign-off from Congress. So even if rogue regime FDRs are rejected by Western countries, which we've seen in the case of sanctioned countries, they still could be exchanged behind the scenes for Chinese RMB, for example, and I believe this is unacceptable. Would Treasury, under your leadership, work with me to reform the SDR allocation process at the IMF?
Mr. Chairman, we believe the SDR process at the IMF should serve the goals of the United States of America and not other states. And as I said in my speech during IMF week, this administration is aligned with you in your goals on the SDR. And furthermore, we believe that the IMF needs to get back to basics in working with countries when there is a market failure in financial markets rather than helping large, well-financed countries.
Thank you. Well, we look forward to following up with you and walking through this. It won't be an easy task, but with international leadership from the United States, I think we can get there, and I think we will all benefit. And that means countries in trouble will benefit instead of just a general allocation approach. The president, since he's been in office, has championed high-profile investment issues revolving China. As everyone knows, he's been negotiating U.S. investors' acquisition of control, for example, over TikTok. In his State of the Union address, President Trump announced a major investment would see Americans take control of 2 ports near the Panama Canal that are currently owned by a Hong Kong-based business. I'm concerned that recently established outbound investment restrictions could make deals like this even more challenging. Under the regulations, U.S. investors don't actually know which companies are off limits, and Americans face bureaucratic hurdles if they want to take control from Chinese owners. What are your views on revising outbound program to change this? Since the president wants strategically to see American investors take control perhaps of some Chinese-owned entities, how do we make sure we get outbound rules right?
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you and the members of this committee for leadership on this. I had a very good discussion with 2 members yesterday where we talked about the importance of establishing a either red light or green light and not having a yellow zone for outbound investment. The outbound investment security program is an important national security tool in our effort to restrict the PRC from exploiting the benefits of U.S. investment. We've been receiving notifications from the outbound program. We're monitoring the market, and we're trying to ensure that the investment community is aware and familiar with the program. We appreciate the interest from Congress, and while legislation will be important and helpful, we would like a bit more time to process, including the work mandated by the President to inform legislation.
I appreciate that. We look forward to working with you. I yield back, and I'll turn to the distinguished ranking member of the committee, Ms. Waters, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Bessent, this is the first time we've met. Is that correct?
No, ma'am. We actually met one New Year's Eve in the Bahamas. And I was...
He didn't make an impression.
Why don't I remember that?
Well, you were much better at the electric slide than I was. And I was with the Prime Minister of the Bahamas yesterday, Prime Minister Davis, who sends his regards.
Well, were you with my husband when he was the ambassador to the Bahamas appointed by Clinton?
So,
Well, you're not going to like this. And so this is the first. I didn't remember that, but that's odd because you've been at Treasury, and I've sent you 5 letters to ask about what was going on under your leadership and only received a couple of cursory replies from your staff. Why don't you respond?
ma'am?
I guess you don't know why you didn't respond. Secretary Bessent, you worked in finance before, right? You will find bipartisan support on this committee for small businesses and the institutions that finance them. I worked with Trump's first Treasury Secretary to pass $12 billion in support for community development, financial institutions, and minority banks and credit unions. So I was surprised when Trump first tried to eliminate the CDFIs, but it caught you by surprise also. You said that the CDFI fund plays an important role in expanding financial access. Unfortunately, you were not very persuasive last week. Trump proposed to basically cut all CDFI funding. Now, let's discuss your job before becoming secretary. Your hedge fund had a secret sauce for how you would make money for investors, a proprietary trading strategy. As CEO, you guarded that strategy. You never allowed unrelated persons to access your firm's computer records, data, personnel files, and algorithms, right? And I'm sure you wouldn't have allowed just anyone unfettered access to copy, change, or to use those records, right? I suspect not, and that makes good sense. What doesn't make good sense is why, as Treasury Secretary and acting CFPB Director, you would allow DOGE unfettered access to the government system that handles trillions of dollars in payments to the proprietary business records of entities regulated by the CFPB, or most alarmingly, to the tax records of hundreds of millions of Americans. But you still threw up the gates of our finance system open to Elon Musk and his band of 22-year-olds. Yes or no? Do you know the level, type, or nature of the clearances and security training required for individuals to access the information held in the computers of Treasury, IRS, or CFPB?
Yes, I do, and I think we would have a disagreement over the definition of the word unfettered.
Mr. Secretary, did all the individuals working with DOGE who were given access to Treasuries and CFPB's computer databases receive all of the required clearances and security training before they were granted access?
Again, they were granted read-only access at Treasury. There were two.
So let me just say,
DOGE employees.
please, you can't filibuster here. This is not the filibuster playground. And so what you did was you let these strangers into our Treasury with access to all of the data, all of the personnel information, and you just opened the door. Why'd you do that?
No, ma'am. They were Treasury employees.
Oh, are you saying today in front of this committee that all of them were Treasury employees, that the 25-year-old who's being identified, who worked for Elon Musk, was allowed into the Treasury? Was that person there?
He was a Treasury employee, as was Tom Kraus, the senior person on the DOGE team. There were only two people.
There were DOGE employees also.
Sorry?
Do you know, were you aware that there were DOGE employees coming into our Treasury getting all of our personal information?
Well, ma'am, there is no such thing as a DOGE employee. There were Treasury employees.
I tend to disagree with you based on the information I have. Has any information been downloaded by anyone working with DOGE from any of Treasury's or CFPB's computers? Answer yes or no.
Not to my knowledge.
You better learn.
Gentlewoman yields
I yield
back. The gentleman from Michigan, the vice chairman of our committee, Mr. Heisman, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. And I just have to note that it's ironic that this has been declared a no filibuster zone by the same people who walked out of a hearing yesterday in filibuster. So, and just to give you one quick brief moment, are you saying that there was no unauthorized or unsanctioned persons that had access to the systems that you are in control of?
Again, there were two employees.
Yep.
There were very strict guardrails, and they were there for an ERP function.
Yeah, so they were authorized and they were sanctioned.
Yes.
So not unknown, and Elon Musk wasn't one of those two people?
No, to my knowledge,
Okay.
Mr. Musk has never been in the Treasury building.
Okay, all right. I have to hit on Burma and a little crypto, and if we have time, China. So I want to thank you for your actions that Treasury took this past Monday regarding Burma. The KNA, the Karen National Army, has become a haven for transnational criminal organizations that run illicit operations such as human trafficking and smuggling. The group has strong ties to the Burmese army, which has targeted religious and ethnic minorities such as the Rohingya since the civil war broke out in 2021. While the U.S. and our allies continue to impose sanctions against the military junta, unfortunately, the atrocities continue. My district, the 4th District of Michigan, is home to approximately 5,000 of these ethnic Burmese. And I'm just asking you, we need to do more to protect the people of Burma and to stop the genocide. Yesterday, I reintroduced the Brave Burma Act, a bipartisan piece of legislation that would require the president to determine on an annual basis whether to impose stronger blocking sanctions against the Myanmar oil and gas enterprise, the Myanmar Economic Bank, and foreign persons operating in the jet fuel sector of the Burmese economy, which has been a tremendous amount of their revenue. And it further limits the junta's ability to borrow at the IMF, which I think is one of the issues that the chairman was touching on. So these actions would target the heart of the military junta's revenue. So can I get your commitment that you're going to continue to work with my staff and us on a bipartisan basis as we try to address these issues in Burma.
Congressman, we're happy to work with your staff on this legislation, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. I share your concern about imposing consequences on persons who threaten the peace, security, and stability of Burma. Treasury has the tools to continue to take action for the people of Burma, and working with you, we will continue to do so.
That's great. And what's frustrating is while some of these sanctions have been put in place, a sanction's only as good as the willingness to enforce it. And we have seen them receiving financial support, the junta, from around the world, especially, frankly, as they ramped up production during the last administration. So I'll note it's not just Burma, it's places like Iran, that this illicit activity that has gone around the sanctions has been allowed. In some cases, Treasury has granted these licenses. I sit on the Foreign Affairs Committee as well, and we see this all the time. I want to touch on crypto. Yesterday, as I had mentioned, the committee held a hearing with House Agriculture, or attempted to hold a hearing with the House Agriculture Committee. Turned into a very important roundtable as well regarding digital asset market structure reform. So can you quickly explain how important it is for America to take the lead here, especially as we see China leaping ahead?
Yes, sir. We believe that the United States should be the premier destination for digital assets. And as members of this committee and the Senate are attempting to do, create good market structure around that, so that U.S. best practices are used around the world.
And that's really the point, right, is having American U.S. best practices to sort of set the pace for others to follow, rather than us trying to fill in the holes that others that may be created as others set that pace.
Yes, sir. And also that digital assets are an important source of innovation that will drive that can drive usage of the U.S. dollar around the world, as with stablecoin legislation. There is speculation that there may be up to $2 trillion of demand over the next few years for U.S. government securities from digital assets.
My time has expired, but I'll send you my question regarding Chinese debt trap diplomacy. So with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from New York, ranking member of the Small Business Committee, Ms. Velasquez, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I want to raise a point of order,
Yes, ma'am.
but I don't want the clock to be eating my time.
I'm sorry. Yes.
I would like for the witness to be swearing in before I ask my questions.
The chair doesn't see a need for that. You may ask your question. Your time can start the gentlewoman's time over at 5 minutes.
Secretary Bessent, you were on CNBC earlier this week making claims saying we are very close and maybe we will see some deals this week on tariff. So tell us, tell the American people, tell small businesses and consumers, tell retirees, specifically, which countries are you close to striking deals with?
I'm sorry, Congresswoman, but that would not benefit the United States.
No, I'm asking you a question based on the statement that you made on CNBC.
And I am telling you that it would be detrimental to the interest of the United States for me to answer that question.
Why will that be detrimental?
Because as the negotiations may still be in process as we speak, as we are not at the end of the week yet, I am sure that you, through your question, would not want to compromise the U.S. negotiations.
Reclaiming my time.
Would you?
Secretary Bessent, the president goes into a press conference and claims that there are negotiations going on. And then the next day, there's no negotiations going on. So why would you not answer my question and that will be considered detrimental to the American people, to the American economy. I do not understand. Despite your claim,
I'm happy to say there are negotiations going on. I'm not going to reveal the details.
No
So-
filibuster. No filibuster here.
so how long do you think those negotiations will take before they are concluded? And
There are numerous countries, as I have said, if you saw my CNBC interview, which you referenced, that there are 18 important trading partners, and we are moving forward at
Okay.
all deliberate speed with those.
do you consider these negotiations advanced negotiations?
Some of them are quite advanced.
So you expect this deal to be more than memorandums of understanding? You expect them to be full negotiated trade deals?
I believe that they will be the agreements in principle, and then we will paper them over in the coming months. But once we reach an agreement, then I am sure that the other countries will live up to it.
Okay. In congressional testimony yesterday, you said the U.S. has not started negotiating with China on tariff reductions. Does that continue to be your position, yes or no?
As you may have read.
Yes or no, sir?
As you may have read in the press, I will be going to Switzerland, and the negotiations will begin on Saturday.
Okay, so the president told you that that will be your answer today.
The-
So can you tell who from the Trump administration is engaged in those discussions
Which discussions?
with China?
Trade discussions?
Pardon?
I'm sorry.
Trade discussions, yes, sir.
Well, the trade negotiations will be led by myself and Ambassador Jameson Greer,
And,
USTR.
and what about Pete Navarro?
Sorry?
Peter Navarro,
He
Is
will not be joining us in Geneva.
thank God for that. Are those negotiations considered advanced?
Pardon?
Are those negotiations considered advanced?
As I said, on Saturday, we will begin, which I believe is the opposite of advance.
Secretary Bessent, as Treasury Secretary and a senior member of President Trump's economic team, has President Trump given you the authority to finalize any trade agreement with China or any other trading partner?
As President Trump has stated, he will have the final decision on any trade agreement.
So you're telling me all of these increased prices, the stock market losses, the production delays are all based on the whims of Donald Trump, that you could strike the best deal with Canada, Mexico, or even China, that is completely in our favor, giving us everything the administration
Gentlewoman's
is
time has
seeking.
expired.
And if President Trump decides at any certain moment,
Gentlewoman's time has
for whatever reason, not to take the deal, that will be it. I yield back.
The gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, who is chair of our Task Force on Monetary Policy, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, as the dust has continued to settle after last month's episode of Treasury market volatility, can you give an updated assessment of those events, and how would you characterize the functioning of the market during that period? During the dust-up in Treasury
The
markets?
how the market was very well functioning. It was volatile, but the underlying infrastructure worked quite smoothly, sir.
Does the Treasury Department have the tools necessary to address market volatility? You've said you may increase the use of the buyback program. Are there other authorities that might be helpful to address the challenges of the market?
Yes, sir. We have a very large toolkit that we can deploy, as does the Federal Reserve.
Taking a step back, Mr. Secretary, can you provide us with a sense of what regulations the administration is working on to bolster resilience in the Treasury market and the timelines when you would expect those changes to be announced? This is a core issue on the task force I and a number of my colleagues are working on.
Sir, the auction sizes, the current issuance sizes leave us well positioned to address potential changes in borrowing needs. I can tell you that investor participation in auctions, there's been broad investor support. Our weighted average maturity is about 61.2 months, which is quite fulsome. And we have implemented a buyback program with two objectives, liquidity support and cash management.
One last question along that line. I've long said that the administration should look at reforming regulations like the supplemental leverage ratio to relieve some of the constraints that market participants are facing in the Treasury market. I hope you'll consider looking at that.
Sir, Treasury does not look at that, but I believe that it is a high priority for the three regulators, the OCC, the FDIC, and the Federal Reserve.
Thank you. And as the SEC continues to implement their clearing rule, a number of firms, including those outside the United States, are looking to provide clearing services for U.S. Treasuries and their derivatives. How are you working with the SEC and the CFTC to ensure the integrity of the Treasury markets as these firms look to intermediate?
Sir, the Treasury market is a global market, and we welcome new participants, and we want to make sure that best practices employed in the U.S. are also employed globally.
And the reason I ask that is, and if you could specifically comment on the clearing of U.S. sovereign debt outside of the United States, what risk could that potentially present? And I come at that from the perspective, if there's a challenge in the market, if it's a U.S.-based entity, then the regulators who would make the difficult decisions are here. If it's outside of the United States, they might have a different perspective.
We are constantly studying that, sir. As of now, we do not believe that it presents a risk, but I will, as we continue our studies, I will have my staff interact with your team.
Absolutely, Mr. Secretary. And one final question. Primary dealerships has become an expensive proposition for firms, which in one explanation for participants leaving the market, it's one of the many explanations. Should we be looking at ways to make the environment friendlier to investors wanting to become primary dealers?
Sir, we saw at the recent auctions very low participation by the primary dealers, which tells me that there may be the regulatory function there that is preventing them from using their balance sheet for the benefit of the U.S. Treasury.
So clearly, the task force that Chairman Hill was kind enough to set up and yourself, we have work to do. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Would you yield?
I would yield to the gentleman from Michigan.
Thank you, and I can get my China question in, so I appreciate my colleague doing that. I want to talk a little bit about the international financial institutions, the IFIs, such as IMF, World Bank, and they're falling short of addressing key challenges. So China, whether it's in Africa or Burma, has really engaged in a debt trap diplomacy. How should the IMF really help borrowers take the fund's advice when it keeps giving China a free pass?
Well, Congressman, as I said in a public interview after one of my IMF speeches, it is time for China to graduate from developing country status. It is the second largest economy in the world. They are a large, important economy, and they should no longer be granted the status of a developing economy.
I'd like to invite you, Mr. Secretary, to continue that answer in writing, and I thank the Vice Chairman and Mr. Lucas. Let me call on the gentleman from California, the ranking member for our Capital Markets Subcommittee, Mr. Sherman.
First, a parliamentary inquiry. Since the last speaker had an extra 30 seconds, can I have an extra 30 seconds?
Right.
I would be happy to do that.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with you that special drawing rights should be increased only with congressional input, and I agree with Mr. Huizinga that we have to focus on Burma, Myanmar. I ask unanimous consent to put in the record a chart showing how the value of the dollar compared to other currencies has declined precipitously since Trump's so-called Liberation Day, and to also put into the record a CBO report issued just an hour ago that shows that Republican proposals to change Medicaid would in one case take 1.5 million people would lose their Medicaid benefits, and in another proposal would cost 3.9 million Americans their Medicaid benefits.
Without objection.
I also ask unanimous consent to put in the record a letter I sent to the Secretary, responded to by his Assistant Secretary, dealing with direct file, which means you don't have to pay TurboTax because the IRS has the software. And the response that I got, an absurd response, was basically, well, as long as, we just want to make sure TurboTax makes a lot of money, so we're not going to do that. And I would point out that the IRS could send every American, for their voluntary use, a proposed first draft of the tax return, since you already have the W-2, you already have the 1099, and you don't have all the input errors that come from people doing their own returns. But that is something that your administration is stopping. I would ask you, Mr.
Without objection.
Yes. I ask you, Mr. Secretary, to provide for the record within 1 week your best estimate of when the U.S. will hit the debt ceiling and exhaust our borrowing capacity. Can I count on you to provide that for the record?
Sir, the so-called X date is a moving target.
I'd like your best shot.
As I stated yesterday, we are moving on to the warning track, and we don't want to be on the warning track. And
I would ask you to provide the Congress the best information you can, but I'm going to go on to another question. I represent one of the two areas devastated by the Los Angeles fires. I spoke directly and on camera to President Trump and asked him to exempt building materials from these tariffs. The National Association of Home Builders says that these tariffs will add $11,000 to the cost of these fire victims rebuilding their homes. Can you assure us that in a country where we have a devastating housing shortage in general, but we have thousands of people in Los Angeles have to rebuild their homes in particular, that these fire victims are not going to face this additional cost to rebuild their home?
I will look into that matter, and I was...
That is exactly what the president said in January.
I was in Los
so
Angeles
far
this weekend, and I toured the devastation.
Thank you. I hope you saw the devastation of the Palisades, and I hope you won't be imposing another $11,000 cost on every home builder. Now, as to capital markets, where I devote most of my time, all of us on the subcommittee agree that we're trying to get people to invest in American stocks and build the American economy. And in fact, our tax code has hundreds of billions of dollars of incentives to get people to invest in America. China also has incentives to get the Chinese people to invest in Chinese stocks. But there's a difference. China only provides those incentives to Chinese people if they invest in Chinese stocks. American billionaires like investing in China, making tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in profit. Can you think of a reason why the American tax code should provide enormous tax benefits like the capital gains allowance to American billionaires who invest in Chinese stocks? Why is that in our national interest?
Sir, it's not just available to billionaires. If you were to buy...
Right, so why do we want to encourage...
buy a Chinese ETF, a very...
Why would we be neutral on whether I buy an American ETF or a China ETF? Don't we prefer American capital to be invested in America, or are we just fine with encouraging Americans to invest abroad?
Well, sir, we don't want to close the capital account, and we do want investors to be able to maximize their judgment where they should invest.
Let me go on to one more thing.
I have said I wouldn't bet against the U.S., but
please,
it's a free
next
country and
question.
people can.
Next question. Abu Dhabi and United Arab Emirates just announced that they were going to give $2 billion to a stable coin put forward by World Liberty Financial. This stable coin pays no interest. So You and I are both finance people, just want to check my math. Assuming a 4% rate of return, is this interest-free loan of $2 billion worth $80 million every year to World Liberty Financial and its Trump owners?
Sir, I haven't seen that. I don't know the expense ratio, and as far as I know, no stable coins pay interest.
So the New York Times is wrong. Please read the article. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Sessions, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Secretary, welcome. We're delighted that you're here. Part of the challenge against you this morning, and I'm sure some days, is the explanation of the tariff matter that President Trump has initiated and sticking by. I'd like to provide just my input on that, if I could, that I think that President Trump sees the relationship with China by what it really is, and that is an unfair relationship, one in which needs to be not only looked at, but really something done about it. And I know that while we have PNTR, it should mean that we treat them the same way they treat us, but that is not happening. President Trump, as part of these changes, has changed the de minimis rule, and that de minimis rule was the amount of money that a package, when it comes into our country under this circumstance, whether it was looked at or not, whether a tariff was paid upon it. And I believe that there were Chinese companies taking advantage of that. Some 4 million packages a day were coming to the United States. And I say were coming because I do not believe that that rate is still occurring. As a result of that, what happened is it contributed to the fentanyl issue that we had because we did not look at these packages with the same viewpoint that others did. My point in bringing this up is that I believe that with the new numbers of 177,000 net new American jobs being created in the private sector, that there's an understanding by people who want to invest in America that this president is finally taking on the Chinese, who undermined not just intellectual property, but undermined with their government, the Chinese government, undercutting the price and manufacture of many products that were American-made. Many of them, or some of them, might be power tools, and of course we know Craftsman is an American-made product. But it is not uncommon, was not uncommon for their tools to be on the internet at $400 or $500 and for a Chinese product to be brought in for $40 or $50. That undermined not just our intellectual property, but actually undermined the manufacturing that takes place in this country. And I'm delighted that you and the president are engaged in balancing that out, and I think that's what this 177,000 new American jobs net provided for us, because it's people who want to invest in the United States, knowing that finally we have a president that will protect that onslaught of Chinese goods, undercutting American, not just jobs and intellectual property, but the events that take place therein. And I think this president has done a great job, and I want to offer my support for that because I think that part of what the president has done is set a new challenge and mark for Americans now to pick up that part that was before challenged by China. Mr. Secretary, Russia still earns over $700 million a day in fossil fuel revenue that helps its war against Ukraine. And I think that most of us here would like to see Russia held accountable. Can you talk to me about sanctions that are or are being considered against Russia energy firms as it relates to selling their products to China?
Yes, sir. And I will tell you that the Biden administration exercised, with regards to Russia, and Ukraine support, a big dichotomy. On one hand, they're giving aid to government of Ukraine. On the other hand, their sanctions against the Russian Federation were very, very weak. The sanctions were just against some of the lower-level oil companies. There was a price cap that has never worked. On his way out the door, in a fit of bravery, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, raised the sanctions because the Biden administration had been worried about upsetting the oil price, pushing up oil prices during an election year. The Trump administration, through our energy abundance and signaling to the energy markets, crude oil is down about 20% thus far this year. And I read with great interest this morning that Russian
Gentleman's
Federation
time has
revenues
expired.
were down 12% last month, which will put a dent in the Russian war machine, sir.
Mr.
Gentleman's time
Secretary,
is-
I hope that you'll find today
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
valuable for us and yourself, and I hope you'll know that we want.
Gentleman
you to come.
from,
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I
gentleman
yield
from
back
New
my
York,
time.
Mr. Meeks is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bessent, let me, I'm just a plain, simple man, the average, everyday American is looking at this hearing today. So can you tell me, first, does trade deficits constitute a national emergency?
The hollowing out of the U.S.
No, just yes or no.
class,
Yes or no? Yes or no,
It's a
sir.
national emergency, sir.
It does. You're telling me trade deficits equals a national, or creates?
Persistent and prolonged,
Okay.
yes, sir.
And do you know also, sir, that for the last 4 decades, we've had trade deficits in the United States of America, and nobody said it was an emergency? Democratic and Republican presidents? You know what that says to me? That it's not an emergency because it hasn't been for 4 decades. It says to me that we should bring tariffs back to the United States Congress so that we can make that determination as the Constitution has said and not try to go around Congress. That's just unbelievable to me. Let me ask this question. Maybe I missed it. Who was the president, and who has been the president since January 20th, 2025?
Donald J. Trump.
Okay. And who was the president in 2024?
One believes President Biden.
One believes? Are you one of those non-believers that the election, the American people didn't vote?
I am not.
You're not? You said one believes? Do you believe in the Constitution of the United States and it should be abided by?
I believe in the Constitution of the United States.
So you believe in it without any second thought. You don't have to think about it. You believe in it and you would abide by it. Is that correct?
I have and I do, sir.
Okay. Well, do you know that a president has said he may or may not, he don't know? Let me ask this question. I couldn't believe my ears. Sunday, during NBC's Meet the Press, President Trump credited himself for the strong economy in 2024 when Joe Biden was president, but then he blamed President Biden for a weak economy in 2025 when he was president. Now, I'm not so sure how the American people puts that together. In 2024, strong economy, he tries to take the credit. In 2025, when he's the president, he blames Joe Biden. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it makes sense to most Americans, and I hope, Mr. Secretary, you're a businessman, it doesn't make sense to you either. It can't possibly make sense to you. Let me ask this question. If a government, say, look, Argentina, I remember when I came here, and Argentina kept failing to pay its debt. Not once or twice or 3 times, and we were all upset about it, and we said that they needed a host, somebody needed to take over their government. You know, somebody should help the president of Argentina. If the United States or didn't pay his debt or something like that, we'd be very upset about that if we couldn't pay our debt. I mean, that's one of our focuses. Is that not correct?
Sir, the United States will always meet its debt obligations.
Always. Well, let me ask you this. Donald Trump, the deal maker, and you didn't answer Ms. Velasquez's questions, no deals, although he said 3 weeks ago that there would be deals. But Donald Trump, not once, not twice, not 3 times, not 4 times, not 5 times, but 6 times failed to pay his debts on his business and went bankrupt. And you're going to call that a good businessman?
The gentleman's
I wouldn't
time has
invest in that
expired.
company.
The gentleman's time has expired.